Call this meeting to order. Welcome everyone to meeting 47 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Government Operations and Estimates, aka the mighty OGO. Welcome everyone. It's meeting 47. Pursuant to Standing Order 106-4, the committee is meeting to consider the request by 4 members of the committee to undertake a study of contracts awarded to McKinsey & Company. Today's meeting will take place in a hybrid format pursuant to the House Order of Thursday, June 23rd, 2022. Members are attending in person in the room and remotely using Zoom. Now, before we get started, I see Ms. Kusi has her hand up already, but before we get started, I just want to make a couple notes. First of all, we have a brand new chair, but before we get introduced, I am a brand new chair. Thank you. New clerk. I want to recognize the great past work that Paul Cardina did with us in the past. So thank you, Paul. I know that you probably are watching readily. And we have a brand new clerk. She's not in the room today. She's doing Zoom because she's under the weather. It's Amy, and she'll be joining us. It's Amy Belmore, sorry. She'll be joining us at our very first official meeting. So welcome, Amy, to the only committee that matters. And also today we're welcoming back Mr. Green, a OGO alumni, who's filling in for Mr. Johns, who's out of the country. With that, we will get started. Ms. Kusi, I noticed you have your hand up.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Merci beaucoup, Monsieur la Présidente.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would like to say welcome to our new clerk, Amy. Welcome. I hope that you will soon feel better.
I want to thank the committee for coming here today. First of all, I want to thank my opposition counterparts from both the Bloc and the New Democratic Party who recognize the urgency of this meeting. I certainly know, as does everyone on this committee, that we were working in progress of having an outsourcing study, as it were. I recognize I'm still relatively new to the committee, but we were going along with that outsourcing study, and I certainly think that it was going along very well, and that it was providing us with lots of good information as to the role of consulting firms within government. But as everyone is aware on this call, we received new information over the winter break. I'm sure you're all aware that on January 4th, CBC published, CBC published an article showing that the current government has spent over 30 times more in government contracts with McKinsey, and that's of course the company we are here to discuss their relationship with the government here today, and company, than under the previous administration. At least that's what we thought until January 17th. The Globe and Mail published an article stating that the actual value of government contracts with McKinsey since 2015, since this government has been in power, actually amounted to $101.4 million, much, much higher than reported. In addition to that, media also stated that the company's connections with McKinsey have also landed the firm a significant number of sole source contracts, and that of the valued $101.4 million in 23 different government contracts, only three out of the 23 were open sourced, and the other 20 were sole sourced. And me coming from a public service background at Global Affairs, I just recognize how completely unacceptable that is in terms of government standards. And this is all happening. This is happening at a time where Canadians are struggling. In the words of my leader, Pierre Poilievre, Canadians are currently struggling to cope with a 40-year high inflation. 1.5 million Canadians visited food banks in a single month. That's just shameful. The cost of a mortgage payment is now a bigger portion of a paycheck than ever before. And some Canadians are going to food banks asking for help with medically assisted dying because they can't afford to live. So this waste is happening at a time when Canadians are struggling. And then I want to take a minute and talk about our public service, a public service that I proudly served in for close to 15 years, that we are having in place a shadow government because of these consulting firms, which is not only creating a lack of agency within the public service, demoralizing the public service, but also creating incredible waste. Because we can see from our studies here at OGO and our within the media and with the public servants that have appeared at this committee that they are not even sure as to what they are doing, what the objectives are of their divisions, departments. And as a result of that, these expensive consultants are being brought in an effort to fix it. But guess what? Studies are showing that they're not even fixing it. So I would even potentially estimate that we are spending 3 times what is necessary of a high morale, high functioning public service. And again, my leader addressed this last week when he said that we want to move work actually internally to the public service. We want a well-recruited, well-trained, high retention public service, but these consultants are getting in the way of that. So we have a situation where we have significant expenditures with this single company, in addition to many others, but the focus here is McKinsey. We have a shadow government which is operating, and we have Canadians who simply can't afford it at this time. They simply can't afford it. But there's more. We have to wonder, whose idea was this? Whose idea was this to start this relationship with McKinsey? Well, guess what? Their former lead, Dominique Barton, is the former global managing partner for McKinsey and led a 30-year career with the firm. While he was working with McKinsey, he was closely connected with the Liberal government and served as the economic advisor to Justin Trudeau prior to his retirement from the company in 2018. Shortly after he retired from McKinsey, he was then appointed by Prime Minister Justin Trudeau to serve as Canada's ambassador to China. Let me tell you, going through the Foreign Service, that is a plum post and not easy to get. But so it's evident where these ideas come from, where the idea to bring in McKinsey came from. It came from the very top. And guess what? I'm not the only one who sees it. The individuals who signed that letter to ask for this meeting today aren't the only ones who see it. The media sees this as well. I'm going to quote from the Ottawa bureau chief of the Globe and Mail, Bob Fife's comments on CTV's question period this past Sunday. These are the words out of Mr. Fife's mouth. They got these contracts. They got them because Dominique Barton is a buddy of the Prime Minister. Bob Fife's words, not mine. And he goes on to say more, that this is what it looks like. He also said that Dominique Barton advised him on the infrastructure bank, which also, by the way, has been a flop. So it's no secret where these ideas are coming from. They're coming from the top. And they're coming from the top, and they're permeating all throughout government, because we're seeing more and more media stories where more departments within the Canadian government are implementing McKinsey as part of what should be solutions, but we're seeing it's not. We're seeing this in defense. We're seeing this in immigration. We're seeing this in health. We're seeing this in different agencies under industry. This is not a single department issue. This is coming from the top with its tentacles permeating throughout government. So it's very clear where this is coming from, who had this idea in the first place to bring McKinsey in. But not only has McKinsey been brought in at the top and at this magnitude, why would the Prime Minister decide to work with a company that has such a questionable ethical background? You know, McKinsey was under fire this past year over their contracts with the government of France and campaign financing for President Emmanuel Macron. Spending on contracts with McKinsey more than doubled in the president's first term, and they are under investigation for false campaign financing for Macron's 2017 campaign. Supposedly, some McKinsey consultants were working as unpaid volunteers for the campaign. So prosecutors are investigating whether this entailed a hidden campaign expense and if the firm enjoyed special access and treatment afterwards when winning lucrative contracts with the government. In the US, they've also recently faced massive criticisms. Although it was Purdue Pharma, American pharmaceutical company, that pleaded guilty to criminal charges in 2019 over their role in the OxyContin and opioid crisis, it was McKinsey and Company that developed a strategy involved with driving sales of addictive painkillers, even as public outrage grew over widespread doses. McKinsey advised the company to turbocharge OxyContin sales, counter efforts by drug enforcement agents to reduce opioid use, and were part of a team that looked how to counter the emotional messages from mothers with teenagers that overdosed on the drug. Shameful. A partner at the McKinsey consulting firm was also criminally charged in the United States with insider trading ahead of Goldman Sachs' agreement to buy fintech lender GreenSky Inc. for $2.24 billion. Puneet Dixit, an executive with McKinsey, exploited information he gained about his client Goldman Sachs pending takeover to buy profitable call options in GreenSky. He had a leading role advising Goldman on the deal. After learning that a deal was imminent, bought 2,500 call options in 2 days before the announcement. He ultimately netted about $450,000. He was sentenced for 24 months in prison for 2 counts of securities fraud. But it's worse than that. It is more significant than that. The engines for many of the missiles fired at the Ukraine war with Russia were manufactured by a massive Russian state-owned enterprise called Rostec. Rostec and executives for that company hired the global consulting giant McKinsey & Co. in recent years for advice. This is the same time the firm was carrying out sensitive national security contracts for the Defense Department and the U.S. intelligence community. This one is very public and possibly the most disgraceful. In 2018, McKinsey and Company's retreat in China took place only 7 kilometers from an internment camp holding thousands of ethnic Uyghurs. This was just a week after a United Nations committee had denounced the mass detentions and urged China to stop. In August 2018, VEB Bank, which is owned by the Russian state, known to be intertwined with Russian intelligence and under United States sanctions, hired McKinsey to develop its business strategy. In 2015, McKinsey published an internal report on the public reception of new policies in Saudi Arabia. In the report, they demonstrated that negative sentiment far outweighed positive reactions on social media, and that 3 people were driving the conversation on Twitter: the writer Khalid Al-Kami, Mr. Abu Aziz, dissident living in Canada, and an anonymous user who went by Ahmad. After the report was issued, Mr. Al-Kami was arrested. Mr. Abdullah Aziz had 2 of his brothers imprisoned by Saudi government officials. The anonymous account was shut down. The Gupta family, a wealthy family from India with business ties in South Africa, has strategically placed corrupted individuals in various South African government utilities and infrastructure sectors. It is alleged that McKinsey was complicit in this corruption by using the Guptas to obtain consulting my apologies. The conversation on Twitter, sorry, I was on to the last one. Trillian was a paid commission for facilitating the business for McKinsey. Pardon me, I'm just having a small. Thank you so much. All right. Trillian was a paid commission for facilitating the business for McKinsey. South Africa's National Prosecuting Authority concluded in early 2018 that the payments to McKinsey and its local business partner Trillian were illegal, involving crimes such as fraud, theft, corruption, and money laundering, Mr. Chair. So not only did this idea come from the very top, from the Prime Minister, and I would also suspect actually his two closest advisors to permeate this corporation throughout government, why are they choosing to get into bed with such an ethically, not only actually ethically corrupt company, but also possibly criminally as well in many nations? And all of these examples that I've given, Mr. Chair, are from after 2015. All of these ethical violations, which I've listed here today. So in a time period where the government had time to be aware as to these ethical violations and yet still decide not only to continue the relationship, but even deepen the relationship, having the relationship develop. So we've talked about the sole source, the shadow government, the amount of money that was spent, yet given the state of Canadians. We've talked about whose idea was this? Why is it permeating government? Why would the Prime Minister and this government continue to work with such an ethically bankrupt company? But then the final question is, Mr. Chair, who's pulling the strings? Who's really in charge of Canada? Canadians go to the ballot box in the hope that they will elect a democratically functioning government, a government that will consider their interests and act on the interests of Canadians, those who brought them to power. But yet, the initial CBC article from January 4th, 2023 indicates that the Department of Immigration, Refugees and Citizenship Canada, who is contracted with McKinsey and the most, indicated that in the article that two public servants explained that many policy decisions were actually decided by McKinsey rather than public servants. They also say these policy decisions were made without public interest as their top priority. The sources in the CBC article also expressed significant concerns over McKinsey's impact on the decision to increase immigration targets. Immigration targets, something that has a profound effect on every single aspect of our country. Our housing situation, our healthcare situation. It's not the government that's actually determining this, Mr. Chair. It's McKinsey, as is evidenced by this article. McKinsey's global head, Dominique Barton, chaired the Advisory Council on Economic Growth in 2016 that recommended immigration targets of 455,000 permanent immigrants per year. Isn't that funny? Isn't that just the number we just saw the Minister of Immigration brag about in the last month? Despite concerns from the minister at the time, the recommendations were implemented by IRCC. So again, this government they are not calling the shots. They are having the shots called by a third-party source, by an external source. And who knows where that third-party source is getting their ideas from, Mr. Chair. So as a result of all of these different pieces as to why McKinsey's relationship and implication with this government is so wrong on so many levels, as I have just communicated, we, the members of the opposition, have come here today with a motion that we are going to now present to the committee. And I will now read it in the record, into the record in English. That the committee undertake a study pursuant to Standing Orders 1083C, italics 3 and italics 9, regarding government consulting contracts awarded to McKinsey and Company by the Government of Canada or any Crown corporation since November 2015, examining their effectiveness, management, and operation, including the value and service received by the government, provided that A, the committee schedule meetings to receive witness testimony, the President of the Treasury Board, the Minister of Public Services and Procurement, and the Deputy Prime Minister, Minister of Finance, Minister of National Defense, Minister of Immigration, Refugees and Citizenship, Minister of Health, and Minister of Public Safety each be invited to appear for at least 2 hours. And the parties shall each provide to the clerk of the committee as soon as possible their preliminary lists of witnesses who the chair shall schedule in a manner fair to all parties. The committee report forthwith to the House that it recommends that the Auditor General be called upon to conduct as soon as possible a performance and value for money audit of the contracts awarded to McKinsey & Company since November 2015 by any department, agency, or Crown Corporation. The committee order each department, agency, or Crown Corporation which entered into a contract, including a memorandum of understanding or other agreement with the McKinsey & Company since November 2015, to provide the clerk of committee in both official languages and with 3 weeks of the adoption of this order, and notwithstanding any disclosure agreements which might be applicable, copies of 1 request for tenders or other procurement requests related to contracts awarded to McKinsey & Company, 2 tenders, bids, proposals, or other applications received in retrospect of those procurements requests, 3 contracts entered into, including any amendments thereto, 4 all correspondence and electronic communications, including emails, text messages, message app communications, and handwritten notes pertaining to these contracts. 5 statements of work performed by McKinsey & Company under each contract. 6 all work product provided by McKinsey & Company under each contract. 7 invoices provided by McKinsey & Company, and 8 records of all payments made to McKinsey & Company. 9 the hours and or daily rates McKinsey & Company charge for each employee working on all respective contracts the company has received since November 2015, and 10 the names of project managers and or project authorities from McKinsey & Company on all respective contracts and projects the company received since November 2015. D, the committee order McKinsey & Company to provide the clerk of the committee within 3 weeks of the adoption of this order, and notwithstanding any disclosure agreements which might be applicable with respect to each contract entered into with a department, agency, or Crown Corporation of the Government of Canada since November 2015, copies of 1, all records referred to in paragraph C, 2, all records concerning the details and descriptions of work performed under each contract, 3 timesheets documenting work done for each respective contract, 4 the hourly and or daily rate McKinsey & Company charged the government or Crown Corporation for each respective contract awarded to them since 2015. 5 the names of project managers and or project authorities from McKinsey & Company assigned to each project from a contract with the government or Crown Corporation since November 2015. And 6 all records concerning subcontracts issued by McKinsey & Company in relation to each contract, including tenders, contracts, or memoranda of understanding, including and amendments thereto, invoices, payments, and evaluations. 7 all correspondence and electronic communications, including emails, text messages, message app communications, and handwritten notes pertaining to these contracts. And 8 the complete client list of all organizations McKinsey & Company has worked with since November 2015. E, that evidence and documents received as part of this study be also considered in the committee's study on the outsourcing of the contracts. Mr. Chair, before I conclude, I will say that I really stood by the words of my leader when he called this out last week, and I was just as pleased to see the Prime Minister's response, the Prime Minister's public response, that he is willing to get to the bottom of this. He's willing to get to the bottom of this. And in fact, the 2 ministers for whom I have much respect for, Minister Fortier and Minister Jaczek, have been charged with this and will take responsibility to work with us in an effort to get to the bottom of this. I'll say, Mr. Chair, I'm very concerned we're going to see another task force or study out of these 2 ministers. I don't want to see that, Mr. Speaker. We saw that with the recent whistleblowing legislation that despite the report of this committee recommendation 7 years ago, which was not implemented by the Trudeau government, it wasn't until a private member's bill from the Bloc came forward where the government decided to do something, get something ineffectual. So in my opinion, Mr. Chair, that won't fly. We need them to be accountable to this committee because Canadians are looking for transparency. Canadians want answers. And they deserve answers. So I absolutely, given the Prime Minister's willingness and giving the willingness of those ministers to cooperate, I expect that this committee, the members of the government on this committee, will be pleased to work with us in tandem as well to really get to the bottom of this. I really think that we're all looking forward to this and to these answers, which will be responded to, excuse me, as a result of these questions that I have brought forward here today. Parce que, comme j'ai déjà dit, les Canadiennes.
As I already said, Canadians have questions. Canadians are having a hard time dealing with inflation. Millions of Canadians have visited food banks. And now, more Canadians than ever are using food banks. Some people are heading to food banks to get medication because they can't afford them otherwise. They can't make ends meet. This is extremely unfortunate, Mr. Chairman. My leader, Pierre Poilievre, is talking about how Canadians are suffering. And in the meantime, this is a good time for Liberals. It's a good time to be a friend of the Liberal government. And yet it's a really tough time for Canadians. So why have the Liberals spent so much? Who is pulling the strings, Mr. Chairman?
Mr. Chair, so in final conclusion, I will say Canadians want answers relative to what I have brought forward here today. Canadians are struggling, and this government is driving up the cost of living. Meanwhile, Liberals and their connected friends have never had it so good. So why did they spend so much? Whose idea was this? And who's pulling the strings? Thank you very much, Mr. President.
Great. Thanks, Ms. Cusi. Motion is in order. We will now go to debate. Mr. Jouari, you had your hand up first.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Mr. Chair, as this is the very first time, despite a number of attempts on our side to reach out to the chair as well as to the clerk to request a copy of the motion in both official language in sufficient time for us to be able to have a look and have a read and get a better understanding of the intent, the scope, and the timelines, and the fact that we did not get any response, despite the fact that we reached out 3 times in 3 different occasions by 2 different members of the committee. I would ask the chairs and the committee members' indulgence for our side to take about 20-minute recess to review this motion, as this motion, as most of you now have a copy of it. I understand some of the members had the copy yesterday as early as 3 o'clock. We did not have, so we didn't have the opportunity to be able to read the motion in more detail and reflect on it. So if you grant us about 20 minutes, we can come back and start the conversation to ensure that the Canadian get the answers that they require. Thank you.
All right, thank you, sir. Why don't we start with 15-minute suspension, and we'll see from there. We are suspended for 15. suspension, and we are back in our meeting. Mr. Baird, you. Mr. Baird, you're first up.
Just while our colleagues get situated, I think that there's an issue with a word missing in the English version that creates a, well, it's a grammatical issue, but then it creates a problem with the French version. So I believe it's in the third last line, or point 8, or sub-point 8, where it says the complete client of all organizations. That should read the complete client list of all organizations McKinsey & Company has worked with since November 2015. So it's a grammatical error, and so unless there's a proposal that that section be struck, I would just look to see if we could adopt that amendment and the translated result just on a show of hands.
Sure. Well, actually, when Ms. Kusi read it into the record, she did read it with client list, so I took it as that is the official one. But I think we can all agree just to change that one word, and then we can go to Mr. Housefather for next up.
Okay.
So I will accept that as approval for that. Thanks. Mr. Housefather?
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you to members of the committee for giving us a chance to have a little bit of a break to discuss the motion that we had not seen, even though we asked for it on Monday and again on Tuesday. And I'm hoping in the context of this study that we will all work together across party lines cooperatively, and that would include sharing things like the motion in advance, which didn't happen in this case, and I'm a bit disappointed. I do want to say, just as a precursor though, I think this committee has a really important, their chair has mentioned many times that this is, the mighty OGO, and how this committee is very important, and it is. It's very important to have an oversight role of parliamentarians over government. And this committee has a very important oversight role. And I think that the study on McKinsey is an important part of our oversight role in the context of our study on outsourcing, which is a much broader question of what should be done by the public service and where is it reasonable, and in some contexts it is reasonable to give contracts outside. And we can use this as part of that overall study to look at that specific issue and come up with recommendations that hopefully this government and all future governments may take into consideration and adopt with respect to when we outsource and when we don't. So I also agree with what Ms. Kusi said, that another question that would be a policy question that we could look at is, when is it that a company's actions abroad that become in the public domain, so we know that there's settlement agreements, we know there's allegations going on in other countries, when should that lead to us having internally a discussion about whether that company's standing offer should be canceled or suspended, and whether or not our current policies go deeply enough into researching what is happening with companies that may be on our list abroad. So I think there's a lot of policy issues here that we can work on together. And I am not of the mind that there's anything inherently wrong in terms of how the government engaged McKinsey or what occurred in respect to any of these contracts, but I'm happy to engage in the discussion and look through them all so that we can all, with our own clear heads and based on the information we receive, find out. Because the goal here is to ensure that Canadians are well informed. So I just have a couple of amendments, Mr. Chair, and I'm going to make them separately, one by one, so that they're not in confusion.
Sorry, Mr. Housefather, just speak a bit slower. I don't write as fast as you speak. Thanks.
Very slowly. The first amendment I would have, Mr. Chair, is to change the dates, all of the places where it states November 2015, to replace that by January 1st, 2011, and all the references to 2015 be changed to 2011. So there's some places where there's a month and a year, and some places where there's just a year. So all the places where it's just a year be 2011, and all the places where there's a month and a year be January 1st, 2011. Et juste pour répéter ça en français, Monsieur le Président, c'est de dire
To repeat that in French, Mr. Chairman, so anywhere in the motion where it says 2015, we would like to see that change for 2011. And where it says November 2015, we would like to see January 1st, 2011.
Okay, we have that. Mr. Housefather, go ahead.
and basically this, I think, is to give us an overview. We've been talking about the contrast between how McKinsey dealt with the previous government and this government. I think it would be useful to have one term of the previous government also to see what the contracts were and the assorted information that's being requested on McKinsey going back four previous years. I don't think it would be much more work to be able to deliver this information than what's already requested, which is pretty voluminous.
Okay, so we've noted that down. Did you have other amendments, Mr. Housefather?
I do, Mr. Chair, but I don't want to confuse them necessarily as making them part of one amendment. So shouldn't I do them after we dealt with one, go to the next? Or would you rather I give you all of them right away?
Why don't you all right away?
Yeah, I would suggest
Let's
that we
just do
go
them all
amendment
right
by
away.
amendment and vote for it. It
Okay.
looks like there is the support on the block side and the NDP side for that change, for
Hold
that
on, just hold
amendment.
on one moment. So you're saying one at a time, or?
Yes, one at a time, please.
Okay. The
So
will,
I'll speak to the amendment,
Yeah.
Chair.
okay, the will of the room seems to go one at a time, and so we'll, Ms. Vinola was first, and then Mr. Barrett.
C'était pour faire suite à...
Just to follow up on what Mr. Housefather said about the scope, if you will. I agree with this motion and the fact that we should look into the matter, which is why I signed on to the motion. However, the problem is that, sure, we can ask questions about McKinsey, its ethics, and many other companies for the exact same reasons. But the problem here is to know whether we really need consultants and whether the government has inside expertise. If the government has expertise on the inside, why is it not being used? There's nothing more demotivating for an employee than to get the feeling that his or her work is not being recognized. I'm convinced that within the government, public servants do have the expertise, but now they're seeing that consultants are being hired on issues for which they have the expertise, for which they can contribute to government. I'm a public servant, and yet I'm not being called upon to contribute. That's demotivating. And for taxpayers, this means that they're paying double. They're paying for consultants and for the public servant whose expertise is not being called upon, whose skills are not being recognized. Now, with regard to the dates proposed, the new dates in this amendment, I have no problem with that. If we're to compare contracts under both governments, that's fine. I'm surprised they're not asking to go back farther into the past. However, we don't want to be flooded with documents either. Certainly, I will go through everything I receive with a fine-tooth comb, but I think we need a decent date, and I think 2011 is appropriate. Thank you.
But it was Mr. Green after Ms. Vinola. Mr. Green?
Thank you, and it's certainly it's good to be back at this committee, although I wish it wasn't under these circumstances. This is something that we certainly picked up in the last session of government with other companies. We found a pattern. Companies like Deloitte, PricewaterhouseCooper, and many, many others, this kind of consultant class outsourcing of government services and contracts. And so while it is the case that it may be a relatively nominal increase for McKinsey from 2006 to 2015 of about $2.2 million, from 2015 at $100 million plus over 23 contracts. It's significant. And my concern, while it might be simplistic and easy in terms of low-hanging fruit to narrow the scope of this study to just McKinsey, like my counterparts on the opposition side, and I think the government would agree, it would, in my opinion, provide a greater value to Canadians in terms of value for money for their tax dollars to get a better look at where this is happening. And, you know, I do disagree with my friend Mr. Housefather in terms of this just being a procurement issue, in terms of when we should or shouldn't procure and outsource our services and our decision-making, because there's an ethical question about the relationships with Mr. Dominic Barton. That's just a fact. And having policies in place around procurement that would provide, in my opinion, clearer and more defined understandings of what those types of perceived conflicts of interest might look like. It is my thinking that if we were to look at the other consultant class contracts that are out, we may find similar things. And I'm not, you know, suggesting this committee embark on some kind of, you know, fishing expedition. But if you look at the numbers, I mean, McKinsey is certainly one of the most atrocious human rights violators in the list, but there's significant contracting out to Deloitte as well. And that's something we heard time and time again, both at OGO and at Public Accounts in my time there. And so I think the dates, yes, I you know, right off the bat, we certainly support backtracking to 2011. But, you know, in my early participation in this committee on this particular study, I would suggest that we also consider revisiting some of those other contracts which have seen significant lifts in their procurement, as well as who is deciding on the incremental increases year after year. So it's one thing to underbid for a contract and tell the government you're going to provide them value for money and underbid everybody else. But then when the re-signing of those contracts come back and we're seeing sometimes a, you know, 160% increase on the contract, I don't think that's an ethical procurement practice either. So I know that my friend is going to have a series of amendments. There's probably going to be a series of amendments around the table, which is fine. My hope, though, is that the outcomes from this change the practices, policies, and procedures in a way that is so clear for the Canadian public that future governments will have a very difficult time to do the same, to get caught in a situation where they may or may not have close personal ties to senior leadership in some of these consultant contracting companies. I'll say this in my close, Mr. Chair, and it's good to see you at the chair, by the way, Kelly, that there's enough conspiracy theories out there about deep state and all this other stuff around shadow government, and these types of things don't help. It's not helpful when the government takes this tact and does this kind of close relational procurement with their insiders and their friends. So with that being said, I'll certainly support this. My hope is that in future amendments to come from my friend and others around the table, we contemplate some of the other points that I brought up. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Green. Mr. Barrett.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I'm sure that there are a number of amendments, so I don't want to speak at too great a length about this particular one. There's a risk that the further we go back, we start to dilute we start to dilute the work that the committee is going to be able to do with an awful lot more information. Why is it that we're looking at these contracts with McKinsey in particular? I think Mr. Green spoke to the ethical questions of the connections between the Prime Minister in particular with Dominic Barton and with McKinsey. Also, the morality of the Government of Canada dealing with a company like McKinsey. Brand Canada is something that I know as Canadians we're all very proud of. I'm very proud of it. And when our government throws in with companies like this, and not just in such a way that they're continuing to do business that they've always done with them, but increasing it many orders of magnitude more year after year, then is this a message that the Government of Canada approves of the ongoing involvement of this company with some of the things that my colleague Ms. Kusi outlined? We're talking about election spending scandals in France, corruption scandals in South Africa. We're talking about helping countries like Saudi Arabia identify, hunt, and target individuals who are critical of their government so that they can punish them and their families. And of course, something that we're all aware of is the opioid crisis that we're facing in Canada and in North America, and McKinsey's role in their work for Purdue Pharma in supercharging opioid sales and their availability, and basically giving Purdue the roadmap to light an inferno that continues to engulf communities and sweeps up and takes lives right across our country. So that's specifically why we're talking about McKinsey. The rise in consulting use by this government is the numbers are astronomical when you do look back. I don't think that I don't think that there's a limit on the comparisons that could be done, but I do think it's important that we consider why McKinsey in particular. Why is this set of outsourcing the one that finds itself in front of this committee? And that initial reporting, or some of the initial reporting, going back to early January with the CBC, where we had public service whistleblowers, not talking about any of the other service providers. We're not talking about things that took place 10 years ago or under previous governments, saying things like, and I want to quote from that CBC article, quote, "We had a few presentations on very generic, completely vapid stuff. They arrived with nice colors, nice presentations, and they said they would revolutionize everything," one of the sources said. "In the end, we don't have any idea what they did," the source added, referring to, quote, "nice marketing that, quote, isn't science." So spending $100 million and the bureaucrats don't know what they were doing, but we do know that that from those same whistleblowers that McKinsey had a hand in transforming policy, not just in management consulting. So I think that it's important that we keep our eye on the prize. We try and remain focused in what we're doing here, and hope that we're able to maintain that focus as we move through the amendments that are being proposed.
Thanks, Mr. Barrett. Then do we have consensus to the date changes proposed by Mr. Housefather? We're fine. Okay, we'll consider that adopted. Changes to January 1, all the dates to January 1, 2011. Mr. Housefather, did you want to continue with your suggested amendments?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And
sorry, let me interrupt for. There's always the issue, unfortunately, of limited resources. Right now, we're at 2:16. I'm getting signals from our clerk. We're probably good for about another hour to another hour and 20 minutes, just so everyone's aware. Please go ahead, Mr. Housefather.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. And just to set everybody's expectations, I do not have complicated or amendments that I think are going to be controversial, and I only have two more. The next amendment basically just relates into the time frame of production of documents from the department, agencies, or crown corporations in paragraph C. Because these have to be translated before they get to the committee when it comes from the crown and the departments, to say that they're going to show up at the committee in 3 weeks, given the volume of documents that are presented and requested, I think is not going to be possible. So my request would be to amend 3 to 5 weeks of the adoption of this order, but to provide them on a rolling basis. So basically, Mr. Chair, that we would say within 5 weeks of the adoption of this order, on a rolling basis and notwithstanding any non-disclosure agreements, so that we get the documents as soon as they're translated, and the last ones would come in 5 weeks, but we don't say that you have to translate all of them in 3, which I don't think is going to be possible. I would, Mr. Chair, distinguish that between paragraph C and D, where we're ordering McKinsey, because my understanding is McKinsey will provide us with documents only in one language, and we have to translate those as well. So those, I think 3 weeks is fine, but it's only in paragraph C where they get translated before the committee that I'm asking for 3 weeks to be changed to 5, but on the clarification, they be provided on a rolling basis. I think that's a reasonable suggestion and would make it easier for the departments to get us the information. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, we seem to have consensus. Oh, sorry. Mr. Barrett?
Just for clarification, I wasn't sure that I caught the exact reference that Mr. Housefather had. The only change was in C, in both official languages and within 3 weeks of the adoption. So the only change is that it would say 5 weeks of adoption and on a rolling basis. So
Yeah, my understanding is as they become available.
As they become available.
5 weeks at the latest.
Okay.
And that was in the first part of C. Was there another part of that, Mr. Housefather, you were referring to?
And no, Mr. Chair, just exactly what Mr. Barrett just said.
So just the one change, 5 weeks, and then as they become available, translated.
Okay, and I just think, Chair, for clarification, that it all parties, everyone involved would be well served by that instruction coming from the chair to the responding entities that what our expectation is, because we've seen challenges where departments don't respond or say, well, there's going to be a lot of trouble, and they come back after the deadline and say, well, now we could start to furnish you with them on a rolling basis.
That's a very good point. What I'm going to propose to the committee is I will work with the parties and our clerk to come up with precise language and expectations in a letter. We've just seen, unfortunately, with GC Strategies, despite our best efforts, the documents they provided were short of invoices, despite the committee asking for all documents. And to avoid that, again, I will work with the committee or the parties. I'll provide it in advance, but work with the clerk to come up with an encompassing set of requirements that we were going to ask for. Ms. Block?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And just so that I'm understanding the change that is going to be made in Clause C, and I'm assuming Clause D, it would read, to provide the clerk of the committee on a rolling basis in both official languages within no less than 5 weeks. No later than 5 weeks. No later than 5 weeks.
Yes.
Just to clarify, Mr. Chair, it would not apply in Clause D.
Okay.
It would only be for Clause C, because Clause D, they don't provide it translated. So there, they should get it in 3 weeks so we can translate them.
Yeah.
It's only for the translation.
Yeah. And we'll ask for we'll ask for the same thing as they are translated to be released to the committee. And then with, are we comfortable with that? I see show of hands, so we'll consider that adopted. Oh, thank you. Go ahead, Mr. Housefather.
Mr. Chair,
I'm sorry.
Sorry.
Oh, sorry. I cannot see that. Madam Clerk? You're muted.
My apologies. I was just looking for clarification. Did you want to maintain the language of on a rolling basis or as they become available, just for precision in the translation of the motion?
As they become available?
Okay. So within 5 weeks of the adoption of this order as they become available, just final call on the language just to make sure that we don't have various versions floating around.
Did you have something, Mrs. Manola? No? Okay. Excellent point. Thank you. It's like having two referees on the ice at the same time, having two clerks. Wonderful. So we're comfortable with that? Show of hands. Adopted. Thank you. Mr. Housefather, back to you.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. And my last simple amendment relates to the amount of time that each minister be invited to appear for. Normally, as you know, ministers are invited to appear for 1 hour, and then they have the officials for the hour after. I'm not sure we're that interested in the officials. My suggestion here is I could amend this one of two ways to say at least 1 hour instead of at least 2 hours, or for an opening statement and at least 2 rounds of questions, which I think is the more reasonable thing, because I think the committee is probably concerned that the minister is there for only 1 round of questions. So if I could propose to amend it to say each be invited to appear for an opening statement and at least 2 rounds of questions, that means that the minister is there for 2 rounds of questions. I think that is fair, and normally it wouldn't be 2 hours. So that would be my other amendment, Mr. Chair.
I'm looking for anyone who wishes to speak to that.
Can he cite the subsection that he's amending?
Oh, is that
2 hours, A.
yeah, that's in section A, Mr. Housefather?
Correct, Mr. Chair. It's in 4th line of section A, and it would be replacing the 2 hours for at least an opening statement and 2 rounds of questions.
Okay, just hold on just 2 moments.
Just in the interest of fairness and compromise, so I like the 2 hour response from Mr. Green, but I think giving the opportunity for opening statements at an hour, or at least 3 rounds of questions, and then nothing's belabored, but then the second and third opposition parties have a total of 11 minutes each for questions over 3 rounds. So I think that's more reasonable.
And that's a good point. That was what I was expressing. It's fine. We'd get 6 minutes. Second round would be 5, but then the other 2 parties would only be 2.5. See, I'm looking after you, Mr. Green and Mrs. Manola.
He's my new union rep.
Mrs. Vanola brings
Yikes.
sweets, so you better step up, Mr. Green. Are we comfortable with opening statement and a full hour, or opening in 3? I think we can get through 3 in an hour.
Yes.
Are we comfortable with Mr. Housefather?
I am, Mr. Chair. It would be an hour 12 to do 3 rounds, but I'm, comfortable in the end result that's, an opening statement and 3 rounds of questions. If that's a consensus of the other parties in the committee, I'm okay with that too.
So opening statement and 3 full rounds. I see consensus. Adopted. Thank you. Was there anything else, Mr. Housefather?
Not for me, Mr. Chair. I just did want to point out one thing. I'm not proposing to amend it, though. I believe that because only McKinsey was in the motion that came to the committee, that it would be beyond the scope if I proposed to amend it to add something else. So I just wanted to let Mr. Green know that. And I think the last part, number 7 or number 8 in section D, that we're asking McKinsey for its complete client list of all organizations. I mean, personally, I don't care. I think it's going to be pretty upsetting to McKinsey to ask for all their clients all around the world. I just was wondering if we wanted to clarify whether that was just in Canada or worldwide. Again, I think it's a burdensome thing for any contractor, the government, to be faced with having their client list potentially provided to a committee. And I, but I also, if the opposition parties all believe that it's important, I'm not going to propose an amendment. I just wanted to point that out. And I think we should check if the scope is Canada or the world.
Okay.
Thanks.
Thanks, Mr. Housefather. Mr. Barrett?
I think, Chair, that when we're talking about, as I mentioned before, the issue has to deal with the brand of our country and the integrity of our government. And we have the mixing of these contractors with our public service, and so the public doesn't know where one ends and one begins. We know who works for our federal public service, and they're accountable for their actions to their employer, the Government of Canada, and ultimately to taxpayers. We have a company that has a dubious record on the world stage. I'm not going to itemize or offer new examples, though there are several. I think it's very important to know, for Canadians to be able to know who the government is doing business with, substantial business with, when we've seen some of these examples today, that we do know worldwide who they're dealing with. And frankly, if they're not willing to share with Canadians who they're doing business with, well then perhaps they're not interested in doing business with the Government of Canada. And so I think that that this is a question of accountability, and I think it's eminently reasonable for us to ask of this, and I look forward to their response.
Yep. So we'll keep it as we'll keep it as global. Mrs. Vinola.
I said this earlier. I'm quite interested in hearing answers. Thank you. I would have preferred 2 hours of questions, of course. Nevertheless, thank you for having agreed to 3 rounds of questions. That'll give us each 11 minutes. It'll never be enough, but we can complement each other in our questioning and try to get the answers that we would not be able to otherwise in our own round of questions. Now, the issue of clients is interesting. This request might be in vain. McKinsey might not want to reveal its list of clients. However, for us, it would be important to know, because we could then find out whether it is our elected representatives making decisions or outside contractors. So therefore, I think it's important to get a list of the contractors. We've been elected. Certainly, we can hire outside advice. However, if national objectives are set by consultants, that is a problem. Because in the case at hand, these consultants are based outside of Canada. Would this make Canada an appendage of the United States or of American consultants? And this would not be a good thing, especially for Canadians and Quebecers. I want to keep my language. So I said this earlier. Are Quebecers and Canadians paying twice for the same service, especially if we have expertise within government? So why go outside government? That would not make sense. Lastly, with regard to the client list, I would like to see that list. And unless I've misunderstood it, there is something missing. We're asking documents from McKinsey. We want McKinsey to also appear to get answers from them. And I think we're studying McKinsey, so we want to know who is making the decisions. And we have to put the question to McKinsey's officials. So in the list we have before us in the motion, we want to also hear from representatives from McKinsey, including Dominic Barton, so they can answer our questions. That would be an amendment on top of the ones which already have been proposed. Now, I would like to know something else. Given the rumors we're hearing, do we want to name the ministers we are asking to appear? Should we name them in this motion? For instance, Mr. Sean Fraser, Minister of Immigration and Citizenship, to be sure that it is actually he who testifies, because there might be a cabinet shuffle and the new minister would not be able to answer questions. So that's my question. Should we name the ministers in the motion? It's a suggestion, but I'd like to hear what you think first. Thank you.
Thank you,
Mr.
Mr. Chair.
Chouinard?
I'm not sure whether it's necessary to do that because all the members can submit a witness list, and in your witness list you could ask for the minister to show up. So you want to name him? I don't think there's an issue, but
I think you have,
I mean,
I think you have a good point there. And back to your comment about it'd be good to have a minister for 2 hours. That would be my preference as well. And I'm going to suggest if we reach that point where 1 hour is not enough, that perhaps a motion from the floor to bring back.
Et êtes-vous d'accord pour qu'on ajoute McKinsey à la liste?
Do you believe that we should get McKinsey officials to appear? Should that be put in the motion? Personally, well, in my position here on the committee, I can ask for one witness. So I would like to hear from McKinsey itself, from a representative, and I want to see that in the motion because we're asking for documents about McKinsey, but the principal organization should be here.
That's a fine point. I'm going to make kind of the assumption that we can provide for that in witness lists provided to the clerk. It's kind of, I think the assumption is that we're not limited to just those specified here. Is that clear for you, Madame?
Plus ou moins.
Well, more or less. More or less. I really would have liked, as the name of the ministers appears here, I think we should also hear from Dominic Barton. I know that each party will submit names of witnesses. I have the right to propose one witness, and I would like to see Mr. Barton appear. But if there's somebody else I would like to hear from, I couldn't choose. I couldn't choose both of them. So I think it would be more logical to have someone from McKinsey appear, and if I put forth that name, other parties can propose other witnesses.
We can either, sorry, go ahead, Ms. Block, and then.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. As I have not sat on this committee as long as many others have, and perhaps only have the most recent precedent of the study that we introduced on ArriveCan, we saw that we had a need to have a very detailed motion in order to be able to get the information that we felt was needed in order to demonstrate to Canadians that we were actually leaving no stone unturned in that study. And I'm wondering if you could advise what the precedent would be in including the names of some other witnesses in a motion to ensure that we have the weight of the motion behind the request for individuals to appear.
To address this, Mrs. Vinola, would you be comfortable with In A, at the end of A, we can add in witnesses from McKinsey, witnesses as proposed by OGO, and specifically Mr. Barton. Shall go to Mr. Green and then Mr. Shawari.
Thank you. And, having been privy to similar type studies, I think it's important when dealing with corporations that we're requesting the senior most person in the country. What we don't want is for them to send a lawyer who doesn't have access to the information and stonewalls the committee. And, it's listed here that the senior partner in Toronto for McKinsey is Ms. Baghai. I don't know if that's the case, but I would ask, if I could, through you, Mr. Chair, that the request go to the senior most person in Canada or their global equivalent, like a senior ranking executive that would have the information and not some, legal team that's going to come here and stonewall the committee. And I'll just share that, I'll share with you at other committees that I'm involved in, and I'm sure Mr. Barrett would attest to this and others who've been involved in it. If a legal team is sent, then we can forget about getting any kind of useful information. It ends up being a waste of our time, quite frankly. And so the demand would be that somebody from McKinsey come that has a senior enough position to be able to speak to the matters at hand. So that would be my only addition to Ms. Vignola. And, I do support just going ahead and naming them right now, naming McKenzie and naming Dominic Barton, and then allowing our other witness suggestions to be free and clear of that.
So along the lines of the most senior person from McKinsey in Canada, Dominic Barton, and other witnesses noted by the esteemed committee. Mr. Jawari.
I'm going to break this into two pieces. One is senior current executive of McKinsey, not an issue, because this is about McKinsey, and we want senior executive who are, at the end of the day, accountable to be down here, no question. As far as specifically naming one individual, if I may suggest that we have possibly a side meeting when the list of all the witnesses are there and collectively decide who we want. Because we are naming one specific individual, and that's an ex McKenzie, and I understand. I've read all the news. I have all the briefing, et cetera, and I understand why you're asking that question. But all I'm saying is, let's not start establishing a precedence that we name a single witness in our motion. We've worked collaboratively before. I'm committed to make sure that we continue doing that. We will put a list of witnesses, and the list of witnesses will always follow the rules that we set at the beginning of this committee by saying that there will be proportional representation of witnesses as we agreed based on the percentages that we agreed on. So I can guarantee you, most probably you're going to have that name from all the committee members coming in. But I just don't want to set the precedence of naming one individual only. As you could see, we are naming the senior executives of McKinsey, and we're not limiting it to Canada. We're limiting to senior executives, or we're expanding to senior executive. But naming one individual, it sets a precedence that I am personally not comfortable. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thanks. I'll go to Mrs. Vignola, but I will note that there has been precedent set. As recently 2 or 3 months ago, one of my motions specifically, when I was sitting in a better chair, specifically called for J.D. Irving to appear, and it was adopted by the committee. So we have done it I understand what you're saying, but we have done it in the past. Again, just very, very recently. Mrs. Vignola?
In short, what I would do, you've made a suggestion with regard to point A. So paragraph A has 2 subsections dealing with witnesses, and I would add a 3rd subsection, which would be to call for an at least 2-hour meeting with McKinsey representatives. And if possible, we could also include Dominic Barton's name in the motion. If it's not a problem, if it creates a precedent, fine. Or maybe ambassador to China, as it says on his CV.
Okay. Mrs. Block?
Perhaps I'm belaboring the point given Mr. Johari's response to Ms. Vignola's intervention. All you have to do is go back and look at the motion we adopted when we agreed to study the ArriveCAN app. We list ministers and their names. We list the proponents of GC strategies. So if we believe that there is weight behind the request because it's in the motion and this is something we are all agreeing to, I would concur with Ms. Vignola that we include those in, if not the person, certainly the position that we want to hear from.
Clerk, I think, is almost ready to read back what I'm sensing is committee approval.
So four amendments have been noted by the clerk. Do you wish me to go back to the 4 amendments or just the latest?
Just the last one.
The last ones. So there might be, I might ask some clarification because of the last comment of Ms. Vignola, but because she mentioned a time frame, 2 hours, she mentioned that. But what I have is that the most senior representative of McKinsey & Company in Canada be invited to appear. So to be added to the paragraph A. I don't know if anything else should be.
That. I think the consensus from the committee, and taking into account what Mr. Jouar is saying, but I think the consensus I'm sensing is, but we're also naming Mr. Barton, and we're also adding in and other witnesses as compiled by the committee. Mr. Green, Ms. Vignola, are we comfortable with that?
I'm sorry, I was... désolée, j'étais distraite.
Apologies, I was a little distracted there.
Mr. Barton and other witnesses as decided by the committee. I think I am sensing consensus with all that. So agreed. I realize this, it looks like we'll start on the very first meeting back when the House is back in session. I assume then the committee is agreeing that we'll start off with this study. I'm suggesting witnesses the first round, and understanding things will be in flux, but I'm asking Tuesday next week to have first batch of witnesses so that our clerk has time to start sending out invitations, knowing it does take sometimes a few days in advance notice to receive, for example, the bureaucracy is noted here to coordinate for the ministers or extend other invitations, and that once received, you allow our clerk and myself and our analysts to coordinate, and we'll get back to you, but to coordinate the meetings and the invitations. Are we comfortable with that for? Yeah. Oh, Ms. Kusi and then Mr. Jouari.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Given that this story is moving so rapidly and we are finding out new information, it seems to be by the day. I just thought I've had some preliminary conversations with some of the members of the committee. I just thought I would check the will of the room to potentially meet next week. Just sort of given the urgency of it, I thought I would throw this out there as a possibility. Recognizing it might be more difficult to get witnesses, but just given the urgency of the situation and the weight of the situation, I thought perhaps if you could just check with the room as to if there is an interest in meeting next week, please.
Yeah, thanks, and I understand it's not the will of the room, I'm afraid. For that.
Okay, I appreciate that. Thank you.
Mr. Jouari?
Nope. I just wanted to get an understanding of when the suggested first date of this study is going to be. So that's all.
Be the first Monday of us back in session, which is, I think we're at 3:30 on
So it would be
January 3rd. Yeah.
At 3:30. Okay. Thank you.
And Tuesday at 3 p.m. for witnesses, understanding as well that we may need to add some or adjust as we go, but if we could have that so we can start filling in, allowing our clerk to start filling in pieces as we go forward. Comfortable with that? Is there anything else from anyone? Do we need to read the amendments through, or are we comfortable as we decided them? Perfect. So we're all improve it as, yeah, so improved as we have walked through them and approved. If there's nothing else, oh, Mrs. Vinola?
Est-ce qu'on doit voter?
Do we need to vote on the amendment and the motion?
OK.
Yeah,
Ah,
one
non,
by one.
j'étais juste certaine qu'on devait avoir.
I just want to make sure that it's been confirmed.
We adjourn. Thank you for those who came out during break week. I appreciate it, Mr. Green. Good to see you back on Ogo, if only for a couple hours. Thank you as well to Mr. LaRouche for filling in. I appreciate it greatly. And again, welcome to Miss Belmore to Ogo, and look forward to seeing you in person next time. With that, we are adjourned.